Welcome, everyone, to this podcast talk on maximising value from the cloud in the NHS. I'm Mark Blanchard. I'm the Public Sector Director for GovNews, and I'm delighted to be facilitating this discussion today as we, I suppose, explore the nuances of optimising cloud management in healthcare settings. Cloud adoption is a strategic priority for the NHS. It's there to deliver maximum value, which will require organisations to transform how they manage their IT resources. And with an estimated 30%, it's such a big amount, 30% of cloud spend wasted, the size of the prize is great. So, yet it can be tricky, and it can be a tricky balance in an environment where poor application performance and downtime is a big risk to patient safety. So joining me today as we discuss this important issue, we're going to delve into the challenges and opportunities of cloud management and what it means for NHS organisations. So we've got Chris Squibb. Chris, good morning. Great to have you with us today.
Hi Mark. Hi everyone.
So, Chris, you're the NHS FinOps lead at NHS England. I'm told you've been involved in FinOps and the FinOps lead at NHS England for the last 3 years with the creation of the Cloud Centre of Excellence and responsible for setting up FinOps and that function. And here today to share your experiences throughout the inception to the maturity operating model, which is now active. So, looking forward to what you've got to say on this issue. So, joining Chris, our second panelist today is Doug Coombs from IBM's Automation division. Since 2006, Doug has helped clients connect with IBM and IBM's automation strategy. And automation, for those maybe not too familiar, is the gift of time. I really do like that saying, the gift of time. And his IBM colleagues assist customers, especially in the NHS, to reduce the complexity of work and bring simplicity to task processes and decisions. And Doug's work delves and drives I suppose, a mandate to understand and redefine and execute and optimize business and IT operations. So, great to have you with us, Doug. Looking forward to talking.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Accompanying Chris and Doug, we have Andrew Ward, Service Business Development Manager at Bytes Software Services. Andrew, hi.
Morning, Mark. Yeah, glad to be here.
So, as a specialist in software asset management and FinOps, with a proven track record of optimizing IT costs, you work with Bytes customers to enhance operational efficiency for their organization. So, looking forward to your insight today. And last on our panel, but certainly not least, we have Ben Demora from Aptio. Ben is a senior FinOps consultant and an experienced IT industry professional with a strong background in enterprise IT infrastructure and technology leadership, as well as building FinOps practices and processes at global businesses, all driven by outcomes, I'm sure. Ben has also been teaching and mentoring in FinOps and contributed a wealth of material to, I suppose, a global FinOps framework, would you call it, Ben?
So the FinOps framework and the training courses that are available too. So it's been lots of fun with that.
Excellent. Well, great to have you with us. And that's our panelists. We've got a lot to discuss. So let's get started. Chris, I'm going to come to you straight away off the bat. This movement that we're going to call FinOps, all around delivering maximum value in the cloud. Can you expand on what that means, first of all, and why it's relevant to the NHS?
Yeah, so FinOps essentially, starting from the very basics, is cloud financial operations. So and kind of from a very kind of basic perspective, it is just getting the message across that your usage, the amount of resources that you use, times the rate, which is the cost of those resources, equals the bill and the cost to the organisation. So that's one of the simple things I like to share as an opening gambit in terms of FinOps, because you can get very complicated very quickly, but essentially it is a quick sum. Which you end up with, which everyone's kind of more focused about, which is the actual end bill. Why is it more relevant for the NHS? Well, not to kind of belittle any other organisations at all, but the NHS has never been under more pressure in terms of money, budget, and obviously from a public perspective. The one area that we hate to ever hear waste from is from the public sector, and especially from the NHS. because of all the kind of pressures we've got on the organisation. So I take my role incredibly seriously in terms of being able to save money, because I feel I treat it the same as my own money in terms of trying to and that message kind of is going across our, has been ingrained in our team within the Cloud Centre of Excellence over the last 3 years. What we've done in terms of what we've done within NHS England since we were established is that we've kind of brought our users on that journey with us. So kind of rather than kind of mandated, cost optimization activities, what we've chosen to do is provide kind of what we say recommendations, because obviously we recommendations and work together with our services, and little by little, once they start achieving cost savings, it becomes a little bit addictive, because it's a good news story that our development teams can share with everyone. So within our DevOps teams, kind of 3 years ago, when I was going to them in terms of like right sizing opportunities, reservations opportunities, the message was very much, Chris, that's great, but I've got to develop this feature product. I need to do this now. This is on my Scrum for this week, on my Kanban board. I need to do this. But what seems to happen is when you kind of filter that up to senior management, adding an additional feature isn't always tangible to senior management. Saving X amount of money is a metric that everybody understands. So kind of got in that gist that it's not just a good news story for central FinOps and the CCOE. It's a good news story for the DevOps team, for the product team, for the program manager, for the exec director, and going up to SLT. So what we did in terms of our main thing, in terms of establishing our FinOps area, was establishing a baseline. What's our cost? Even if that was just the whole cost of the bill for NHS England, that's your starting point, because then you can start looking at trends. Even if it's one great big number, you look at the next month. Has that number gone up or down? There's your first trend. So what we did, we established a number of baselines, and we'll establish it during some other questions in terms of how we've kind of defined that more and more. But yes, in terms of kind of how we've kind of evolved in terms of FinOps with the NHS, it's been a real good kind of way that we've run it, because now I feel a DevOps engineer has automatically got FinOps baked into them now. I think a DevOps engineer's role is no longer just spinning up the shiniest, high performance tin possible to make this actually, that's very much frowned upon within the DevOps world now. Cost management is absolutely imperative in terms of design choices and architecture choices.
Yeah. So, Andrew, I'll come to you. Can you expand on what FinOps means to Bytes and why it's relevant for your NHS customers?
Yeah, definitely. I think what Chris covered there is probably quite poignant, obviously for the NHS, but also for kind of a lot of customers in other sectors. I mean, for us, FinOps is always a conversation between sort of functionality and finance. How are we able to get, sort of the most functionality and the best functionality whilst also being able to finance it correctly? As Chris alluded to, we can spin up the best resources at the highest level of cost, which will obviously be able to deliver on a functionality point of view, but then we'll not be able to sort of sit there at the end of the month and be able to say that we, be accountable for the amount of money we spend. And then likewise, what we don't want to do is flip it on its head and start scaling down too much from a functionality point of view, and then we end up appeasing people when it comes to cost, but then we're not able to deliver what we want to. So from us, it's quite crucial within sort of the three key pillars of FinOps. We're looking at, firstly, inform, so understanding where our costs sit. And it sounds like quite a simple thing. Where do our costs sit? Well, we can just look through an invoice, or we can look at a tool set. It'll tell us where our costs are, and that's it. But there's so much more to it, because we then got to understand, well, where those costs sit within certain business units, what resources are these sitting in, and potentially then the impact of then changing the costs and changing those resources. We then move into the optimization stage, so as a second pillar. So, that's kind of touching upon, well, how do we then sort of cut down those levels of spend? How do we, and I'll probably use this quite a lot on this podcast, talking about trimming the fat. Where are the areas that we can look at certain resources, we can look at certain machines, certain disks, and how can we bring those into a scale that's going to be functional, but also as well be as cost effective as possible. And then finally, we're then looking from the operational side. And I think this is kind of the third pillar that doesn't necessarily get ignored, so to speak, but it's probably the less focused or the least focused on is, well, how does this fit within our operational goals? How does this fit align with our budgeting, what we're looking to do for the next 6 months, 12 months, 3 years? How does this align with our overall company structure? And we'll talk about it later on in the podcast. We can talk about, our sustainability goals, for example. Well, we're using cloud computing now. How does that fit into things? We're looking to, develop new things. How does that impact our time to market? So it kind of all is brought into one whole thing around FinOps, what we're doing, how we can optimize it, and then how that fits in, with what we're looking to achieve. That's what FinOps means to us at Bytes, and that's what it means to a lot of our customers as well.
Ben, I'm going to come to you. What does it mean? Why is it relevant to NHS customers that you work with?
So I'm going to pick up on something Chris said about the fact that DevOps is baked into the FinOps rather is baked into the DevOps engineering teams. I love that. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think it's essential that FinOps isn't seen as an ivory tower function that happens somewhere way off in the distance, right? It is a change of behavior fundamentally to how we operate and how we relate to our technology that we leverage. It is a change of ownership and accountability, and driving that awareness, enabling and empowering all of our engineering teams and our business teams to make good value decisions with up-to-date, accurate and transparent, easy to understand data, to be able to make the right choices, to be able to optimize not just the environment, but optimize themselves, their own choices, their own decision pathways. I think that's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that one point. I think that's wonderful. And I think that the more organizations that can start to do that and take that mindset of FinOps is not just a thing that some small team does somewhere, but it's a change of behavior that we all have to embrace and support and work with. I think that's awesome. So I just wanted to pick that up. That's really cool.
Okay. So the NHS Cloud Centre for Excellence strategy outlines the ambition for the transition to the cloud. How can optimizing cloud management help organizations fully leverage the benefits of cloud adoption? Andrew, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah. So I suppose probably the first point, and I guess it probably is attributed to, sort of the FinOps side of things, is cost efficiency, right? It's ultimately around, we've got resources that were available, how do we optimize those as best as possible? In doing so, what that then enables us to do is have the right level of budget for the right areas. So in overspending in cloud, what that can sometimes mean is that then cuts down our cloud budget, it cuts down to budget to other areas, when actually it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. What we're then able to do off the back of that, sorry, 1 second. Apologies, got a frog in my throat. So then from there, what we can then look at, we can look at sort of operational side and performance optimization as well. So how do we scale our strategies based on cloud adoption? So we might be looking at other pieces. We might be looking at whether it's a hybrid cloud environment, might be looking at a multi-cloud environment, and we can start to begin to build out a picture of how we can, how we benefit from having those things in place. There's obviously other projects that we're then looking into moving into. So for example, we can look at, well, how can we scale this? So we've obviously started off with a low level of infrastructure. How can this then scale to other deployments? And we talk a lot about sort of the involvement of DevOps engineers, and it's all about sort of bringing them into the picture, and understanding, from their point of view, well, how can they do their best work? How can they achieve their goals? And what I feel that optimizing your cloud allows us to do is to bring in all relevant parties to that whole process. We're not being dictated to exclusively by DevOps and those on the ground doing the work, but also we're not exclusively being held to a level of budget. It's all about bringing everyone sort of under one roof and allowing us to to do sort of our best work ultimately.
Yeah. Chris, obviously it's a big part of the NHS in terms of the Cloud Centre of Excellence strategy. How are you seeing, and what can optimize cloud management, and how is it helping organisations in the NHS fully leverage the benefits?
So we've got a growing community within the NHS now. Well, obviously, we do a lot of speaking in terms of organisations who are looking to adopt a cloud, who have just adopted to cloud, and we kind of just tell them what the journey is going to look like. So we got so a big myth a few years ago was cloud is cheap. Well, it's not cheap. It can end up being as cheap as efficiently as it can be, but it's just showing an organisation and almost educating business leaders within that about what will happen when a cloud bill lands and what the landscape will look like, and just being open and honest. And I'm very clear when I do my demonstrations and talks within NHS. I can show all our graphs on our cloud management software, and they look great. Over the past 3 years, we've got down. There's a lot of work there, and you can't just get to that stage in 3 months. There's a lot of work involved in analysis. You've kind of got to onboard onto cloud, and then you're at your peak of your spend. It's just making the visibility that actually that might last 6 months, because you don't want to make rapid decisions within 2 months that may end up committing you to things for kind of 1 year to 3 years. So I think kind of showing teams and other organisations about what your cloud journey, not only to cloud, looks like, but when you're on cloud, this is how the journey will look in terms of what it can be look like. And it's really just by kind of within the FinOps Foundation and a lot of it is just repeatable best practice, which can really be used across every organisation. So there's not too many, there's not some areas might have specific level tagging needed, but generally you can just kind of roll out kind of your best practice approach within your organisation, and they'll probably get kind of a great 70% FinOps fit for their organisation. The other 30% will kind of be just the bespoke nuances that particular organisation will have. But once our teams can see that it's worked in one organisation, 2 organisations, I think it's then a powerful tool for trusts and other sites that are looking for cloud adoption to kind of share with their senior leadership and go, actually, this is what's happened within the cloud CCOE. This is what's happened within another trust that's happened. This is the journey we're on. We're going to go on, and it just builds that confidence for cloud adoption and the benefits that will come from that.
Okay, well, let's stay on that theme of best practice. Let's share some examples of what healthcare organisations are doing practically, applying the principles of FinOps and effectively managing cloud spend and resources. Doug, I'm conscious I've not come to you at all yet, so get us started on that if you can. What examples are there that you know of?
And it's interesting, the benefits and the consequences of this stuff for the NHS are certainly be mirrored in real world examples and real world delivery. I'll talk about 2 particular examples. They're both based out of the US, all obviously healthcare environments. And the first one is with an organization called Providence. Providence represent about 120,000 caregivers. They span 52 hospitals, have over 1,000 clinics. Okay, so not an insignificant environment that they're looking at. When the new CTO and Vice President of Infrastructure came in 2019, he was hit immediately with a budget problem. Okay, how could he put an out of control budget back into some order and give some visibility, and also an agenda to go modernize a very old legacy type of environment and world? So he started to implement some of the capabilities around financial management, around operations management, and that started to gain some benefits in terms of, first of all, he started to do something called right sizing. So take a look at what they had already on premise and start to think about how could they properly scale the appropriate amount of resources and capabilities for the right cost. Okay, and within 10 months of starting that operation, they moved 1,900 workloads off of their on-premise environment into Azure, into their cloud environment, their chosen cloud environments, and saved multi-millions of dollars in the process of doing that. And a couple of consequences that came out of doing that. First of all, perfecting the right size of the environment before they then moved it enabled them to save and focus money and people and resources in other places. And it enabled them to go faster. Okay, so they weren't just simply going, okay, here's workload X, I'm going to maximize my cloud environment to a peak and then just move it and then worry about it later, because they knew that was a waste of resource, it was high cost, it was all of those things. So that was one thing. The other thing was visibility. That, and Chris talked about this. The visibility came immediately to the people that were providing that cost profile to the organization, but also the operations profile to the organization. They had a big cultural problem. when you start to use cloud words like elasticity, for example, where you could scale an organization's infrastructure up and down depending on need, they didn't get what that was. They didn't understand what they was. They were constrained with the boxes inside of their data center. So, how can you get that across? Well, that comes through visibility, understanding of what my infrastructure is all about, and then seeing how that then is morphed and moved. The other example I'll use very quickly, and I'll let the other guys come in, I'm sure they've got things to add, was through an organization called Southern Nevada Health District. Those guys talk about the speed of which they started to get that visibility, literally in days. And sometimes, IT organizations are prone to exaggeration, but literally within days, I start to get an understanding, a picture of what my costs are for my infrastructure and the issues of performance within that infrastructural stack. And again, that drove the ability to then to go share and understand, and then obviously from that start to get some recommendations. And they, by the way, at the beginning did everything manually. They got a recommendation and it would go to someone to approve it and look at it and all of those things. And they soon realized, we've seen that a few times now, and the solution is this thing here. I'm going to flick this switch, and all of a sudden I start to automate it. And again, that has massive consequences on skills, on time to value and things like that. So, two examples of where we see organizations using these things and quickly getting to value for their organizations, but also understanding not just what happens on day one when they do this, but then consequently what happens on day 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 of their operational environment.
Any other examples our panelists can add, which are, applying the principles of FinOps that perhaps have generated additional benefits?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to go with a couple from our perspective. So we we split kind of FinOps implementations into kind of 2 categories: centralized and decentralized. So centralized centralized commitments and centralized implementations are something that we can really control from the center within the FinOps team and the CCOE. So things like savings plans and reserved instances, we can look and make that decision on behalf of the organization. So when we first started up, a broad thing will be 10% of teams had kind of gone and looked at RIs and savings plans and were nearly going to commit. 80% were kind of like, oh, not sure, we might do that, and 10% didn't have a clue what they were. What we could do from the centre was go, actually, we're going to vouch for this. We're going to recommend this. We're going to look at the calculations from the centre across all of the accounts or subscriptions in our main account. We'll do the analysis, we'll do the due diligence, we'll do the business case and all the stuff that was, all the barriers that were seen, and we'll vouch for it. So what we did early on was, you can imagine during our spend that a kind of a return on a savings plan commitment is extremely valuable for NHS England. So that was one of the things, the quick wins that we saw it as a quick win. Well, actually, it turns out to be our most kind of profitable savings mechanism via savings plans and RIs. But once that gave us that level of confidence that actually the CCOE are actually coming in, they're saving us work potentially, and everyone's benefiting. It's a win-win there. What we do we do as many as we can from the centre, but obviously we realise there's decentralised implementations as well. So like Doug was mentioning about right sizing. We've got all the reports and analysis across all of our recommendations across the organisation, but we've got over 100 services. So there's no way I can know from the centre about a national service like Spine what this recommendation means for the service performance there, because it may well just be set up that they have one particular spike on a month and they have that particular machine type for that spike that comes in on a particular month. And if we if it was right size from the centre, we would take it down. It wouldn't be able to process on that particular day. It is implemented. So what we do is we kind of share that, and we generally share it with the teams as these are recommendations. They're not mandatory implementations. But what we do is we kind of work with the teams, and as long as they come back to us and they're kind of saying, actually, that right sizing recommendation for that instance, which says we can save, £1,500 a month. Well, we've got that there. That's a load balancer that we need, and actually it's inactive. for part of the time, but that's part of the make. Fine. We've audited that, and then we can filter that out of the next reports. So once again, but it's just that approach that we've always had with our teams that, from FinOps, I hear some previous tales that spend is bad. Spend is really good when you know the spend is needed and warranted. So that's kind of the areas that we do. And we're just working with other teams, right sizes ones, unattached discs, any new features. We kind of work very closely with the teams. But yes, certainly, whatever we can do within the central period in terms of commitments, we own them and we manage them on behalf of the organisation.
Yeah, Ben,
Mark, can I just come back?
I saw a lot of agreement. Oh, sorry. Go on, Doug, quickly.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to come back on one thing that Chris said, which I think is really important, and that's the notion that one size doesn't fit all. So this ability to have both centralized and decentralized, as Chris has talked about it, and also, certainly our customers are seeing the ability to be able to understand individual workloads and set a policy to be able to govern what those are, I think is crucial in delivering this, because simply applying stuff top down in one view, one lens just doesn't work. So sorry to add, please.
Yeah. That's absolutely fine. Ben, I'm going to come to you on what's just been discussed there and that question of perhaps examples, but I want it to also lead into, why leaders are nervous about that transition to the cloud, and that I don't know if it's the prospect of the bill shock or what other considerations need to be thought about.
I think there's enough horror stories out there now about people having this bill shock experience and getting it wrong. And my least favorite word so far, which is repatriation, which I've seen in various things, and Andrew's nodding. Yeah, moving back to the data center because you got cloud wrong. I think there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about that, and I think that's natural because it's a completely new paradigm and way of operating your technology stack, right? You don't own any technology anymore. You are effectively consuming a service instead of buying a server. You're paying for things as you use them when you ask for them, right? That represents it's a significant shift in a lot of different things. It's very hard to forecast, for example, right? I used to do capacity management and forecasting for a data center, and I had 12 times a year I would spend money, and that was fairly easy to forecast, right? Once a month. But in cloud, the bill is every second. In cloud, services are billed per second or per unit of delivery, which happens. And that is a significant shift in usage and in terms of forecastability, which is challenging. You've also decentralized your buying process. You've no longer got a procurement team who are the stopgap, who are the check and balance against whether or not money gets spent. Ultimately, the fingertips of your graduate engineer who's been given access to write Terraform in AWS is now spending money and committing the business to spend money on resources, right? And that's a change in behavior. How do we support that? Well, we need to adopt a different way of thinking about this stuff. We need to start to drive ownership and empowerment. We need to provide that understanding, that insight and clarity about the consequences of these decisions, and also kind of connecting that back to a wider business strategy and making sure that we're focused on the right engineering pieces and the right commitments as well. So I love what Chris was saying about the centralized commitment choices, but being supported by context and being connected to, right, we should commit to this and we should do this because it's valuable and this is what we should do, right? Versus we should commit to this because we're spending X and we want to commit to up to a Y percentage because we think that's the right level, right? I think, did we lose Chris? Is Chris?
Most slightly, but he'll be back, I'm sure.
Okay, fair. Yeah, so that was kind of my view, right? I thought it was a really good piece, but ultimately it comes down to this collaboration and ownership and driving decisions from a standpoint of data, insight, and business value. And if we start with that view, then it's not as scary.
Yeah. Welcome back, Chris.
Cheers, Chris.
Sorry about that.
It's all right, don't worry. Andrew, I'm going to come to you. Why are leaders nervous? Why are those NHS senior management team nervous about that transition to the cloud? Is it the bill shock? Is it that we need to put things in their language and think about how things are presented from the digital transformation owners?
I certainly think so. I think, touching on what Ben said there, I think, the ultimate nightmare is, having to go back to an on-premise infrastructure. That's something that we, hopefully organizations would have sat down and had, meeting after meeting about the benefits of moving into cloud and what we can achieve by moving into cloud. And, so much of that comes down to that planning stage, at the beginning of the whole project. We have seen, unfortunately, there are nightmare cases of customers that have thrown everything into cloud as quickly as possible. Not really sure what they're doing, but somebody at the top of the tree said we want to be in cloud within 6 months, and then what that happens then in 6 months' time, or even closer to that period of time, they've gone, oh no, what have we done? So the planning and the strategizing around moving into cloud is as important as being in cloud itself. How does this align with our business goals, and ultimately what does that roadmap look like for us, not just in the interim, not just in a 6-month time frame, because that's where we want to get to, but what does that look like for us in 12 months, in 24 months, in 36 months? Because I think all people on this podcast would agree that cloud computing and moving into cloud is a significant way forward. There's a lot of progress with that, and it's only going to get better for people within cloud. So I think it's all about understanding the right sort of strategies and moving forward with that. And, I think so. The bill shock is certainly one concern that people have. I think there is also the sort of the familiarity with it. When we have, as Ben alluded to, you suddenly got people that can start spinning up resources here, there, and everywhere. It's different language, it's different terminology, and ultimately it's a different platform for a lot of people. So, we have to be conscious that there is potentially, whether it's a skills gap shortage or whether it is just a language issue, that there are going to be, organizations moving into cloud that may not have those resources to be able to deliver it properly, and that's absolutely fine. And there's certainly no harm in looking to other organizations and people to assist you in that journey to cloud. But it's ultimately about making sure that if you're going to do it right. We see so many cases, across other businesses, and so many sort of analogies that we can do, sort of across life. You run too quickly in the first 10 meters and you're absolutely gassed by the time you get to the 100th meter. There is that sort of, that analogy works out quite nicely with cloud. And I think in order to, sort of support that, as I said, we've talked about planning, but also as well, getting the right tools in place that can support you with that. Getting visibility across your cloud environment is such an important part of being within cloud. If you don't have visibility, ultimately you get one view every month, and that's when your bill comes through. And that's not the right way to be managing your cloud environment. Keeping an eye on when these resources are being spun up, who's spinning up these resources, and why have we done that? The more that we're able to manage that process from end to end on a day-to-day basis, ultimately that will hopefully negate a lot of the bill shock issues. There will be instances where there might be spikes that we didn't anticipate, but if there's a spike that we didn't anticipate, if that's running for 24 hours, that's significantly better than that running for 24 days, for a month. So keeping on top of it is, it's difficult. It's not easy. We know that, it's all very well easy to say, well, just keep on top of your cloud environment. Why wouldn't you do that? But there's certainly things that, that start at the planning phase and go through the operational phase where, customers can benefit from being in cloud and being as efficient as possible.
So on the flip side of that, other side of the coin, are there any concerns about minimizing waste on cloud spend in healthcare, Andrew?
Yeah, so I guess, there is obviously the element of, trimming too much fat. If we do over optimize, we can leave ourselves in a tricky position. I think it was Chris that mentioned there, they've got sort of certain resources. You've got a load balancer there that kind of does what it needs to do when it needs to, but it's not on all the time. If we then look at that and go, well, it's only being used 20% of the time, let's get rid of it. Then you get yourself into issues where suddenly you haven't got the right resources in play that are going to do that. We've then also got, I think, probably thinking about from a general point of view across, what the NHS is as an organisation and what it delivers. If we start, cutting down too much, well, does that bring in security risks? Is there, possibility of having data issues that align off the back of that? So those are things that we're always, really cautious. There is such a thing as over optimization. I've seen it. I think every panelist here has probably seen it as well. So, there is always that concern, particularly within a healthcare environment where there is so much important personal data there, that we've got to make sure that we're still being secure whilst also being able to deliver within all the other projects that we're doing. So it'd be interesting to see what some of the other panelists think about this.
Okay. Doug, I'll come to you.
Thank you. I think also another lens that we ought to be cognizant of, and it maybe is an obvious thing to say, but the stakeholders involved in this, many of those stakeholders, their primary concern is patient care. How do we deliver the best patient care that we can? And one of those lenses absolutely is, money and cost and all of those things. But there are other factors that need to be involved. Ben used the word context. I love the word context, my favorite word in the world. You do something based on context. Okay. So you need to have a better understanding from all angles. Yes, it's great to have a performance first mindset, but that performance first mindset is not just about, can I reduce waste? Can I optimize the resources that I'm doing to scale them appropriately at the time that I need them? So that'll drive down your money thing. Of course it will, but also maybe I remove some resources and that affects my ability to then deliver the service to the customer. So, you need that notion of a policy that governs. So I love the idea that Chris has around recommendations. Much of what comes out of FinOps is a recommendation, and then I apply the consequences of those recommendations to my environments, my ways of working, the services I have to deliver, and then I take the right recommendations as I need to appropriate. And of course, critically, if I can, and sorry, a bit of a stuck record, you want to be able to flick the switch that says, for these ones, I want to automate. And that comes from visibility and confidence that I've seen it before, I've done it before, and now I can go just do these things. So, yeah, so I think that sort of consequence is important, and we shouldn't forget that. And I'm sure none of us on this call or outside this call listening will forget that.
Ben, Chris, anything else you want to add on that subject?
I think it's just building that trust within your workspace and your environment. It's kind of, when I can imagine when we first introduced FinOps, it's this guy's going to be on my case 24/7, wanting about every bit of spend, every new account we spin up, and absolutely that's not the case. And it's kind of like what Andrew says. We've just got some safeguards in place. Daily, weekly, monthly bill shock alerts. So once again, if they come up, we look at them from the central point of view. We reach out, and it's just not a why have you done this? What's happened? It's a, are you aware of this? And it's exactly kind of how it should be, that kind of collaborative piece. And yes, one of the things without FinOps, when we first started, we did obviously a look at all of our accounts that are within our space, and we, I think it was 2021, and there was a Hackathon 2018 account running. And luckily, it was about £8 a month. But that without that's an area with if that was a very big hackathon environment, then it's just sitting there because no one had the kind of gumption to kind of close it, because no one really cared, because someone in the centre was picking up this bill. Whereas now, now we going off topic a little bit, but now we've got centralised chargeback that actually it doesn't go into this black hole. It's your business partner within your area.
Right.
It's going to be charged for it. So they've kind of got that as well.
Yeah.
Chris, you made me smile.
Sorry, go on.
Chris, you made me smile. You reminded me I found a dev environment from 2018 last year.
Yeah.
In some ways, the year before last. I was like, why is this still here? Yeah.
I'm very thankful for that hackathon environment, because it's a great example to use. So
it is,
yeah. So it's really one that's pertinent with kind of when we speak to new DevOps teams, etc.
Yeah.
Now I can imagine just don't name it with a year. So they don't really
keep it. It was recent, promise.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something Doug said as well, right? Like, it is about balance. It's about, so we use this concept within FinOps when I teach the things. We use this concept of an iron triangle, right? Of speed, cost, and quality. And there seems to be a conception among some people that FinOps is all about cost. It's all about cost out. It's all about waste avoidance and savings and everything else. And actually, we need to be conscious of this balancing act that has to happen between quality may not be a compromisable thing. Right? In healthcare, you cannot compromise on service quality. Right? Speed might be a critical thing in the market you might be in, pace to market. Right? Sometimes cost isn't on the front of the list, and it's a balancing act to see which one comes to the fore first. So it's a good point. Yeah.
So I've got one question left that I'm going to put to you, but before that, have you got any questions for each other based on what you've heard?
I think it's kind of nice to know that kind of within this area, kind of there's been a lot of kind of agreement in positions. I think one of the worst things that could have happened is you have a panel of FinOps. FinOps. We work within FinOps, and we're kind of wildly thrashing out lots of different ideas and contradictions. So I can imagine when it goes out there, it's like, well, if they don't know, then how are we supposed to know? But the fact that there's general kind of general consensus across all the points there, which has been really good, and it's kind of testament to the FinOps framework that once again I always kind of belittle myself and the FinOps role, but it really just is a great deal of common sense. Once you've got them kind of best practices under your belt.
I've actually got a question for you, Chris. So you mentioned the framework. One of my favorite things about the framework itself is how diverse it is and how broad the skill sets that you need in order to deliver that is. What's the view within your area of the NHS about how do you sort of identify the right people to fill all those different skill sets? I mean, you've got financial, you've got forecasting and budgeting, and you've got anomaly management, you've got engineering, workload management, you've got culture and education. There's so many different spaces that FinOps kind of touches on and involves in. So I'm interested to know. So, like, how do you shape that within the NHS, and what do you do? What do you look for?
So we're quite lucky. So within the CCOE, we're quite a tight team. So we're a small team of about 10 resources, half split across kind of engineers, high level engineers, and the others around kind of within supply and management and etc. So there generally is kind of when we need an area, there generally is a kind of a consensus within the team that who should lead on a particular area. So when we're kind of rolling out kind of like an engineer, like a tagging best practice, I can actually I will be the one to kind of evangelize the financial teams about what do you need. So how do you want do you want cost centers, portfolio code, service name? So I will go and kind of source those kind of requirements or interactions with the team. Then likewise, I will then hand off the technical requirements to the engineers to go and speak to the DevOps teams. So when they can kind of go, actually, we need to implement this tag in here. This is how you implement this policy. This is what we want the naming convention to be. So I think it's kind of a lot of the time there's just a natural fit, but it's knowing it's getting the right people to speak to the right team. So if I start to speak to the technical team, it won't really work, or actually that call won't complete as satisfactory. They'll need another call. Likewise, if the technical team starts to speak to the finance team, it will be actually we'll need someone else to fit in. So it's just about not trying to bite off more than you can chew, really, and just kind of know your limitations. But I'm kind of broadly technical, but I think a lot of the people when I sometimes speak to the technical teams about recommendations, like the fact that when I'm speaking with them, they know that I'm not re-engineering or re-architecting their service in my head. I'm just kind of like I'm using the data. And that kind of thing. So that's kind of I think what we would do, Ben.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions or comments you want to put to each other? No? Okay, well, let's move on. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to the art of the possible, looking ahead to the future. What's on the horizon for cloud management, and why might efficiency not necessarily be the main driver? Who wants to go first?
Well, this is I don't mind just if I can. So I know Andrew did touch on this as well, so I think Andrew will naturally be brought into this. But certainly in terms of green ops and sustainability, so absolutely aware of that's it's on the horizon, but we don't know how far the horizon is, especially being in the public sector and in terms of potential how government policies, etc. Things could happen quite quickly in terms of recommend. So I'm conscious that I've taken a bit of an air of the green ops lead within the CCOE, just because there's a lot of synergies with FinOps, but then there's a lot of contradictions within FinOps. And one of the areas that I just want to kind of I'm putting out there to the team is that there may be a point in I don't know when that will be, 1 year, 2 years, probably 5 years, that things like savings plans and reserved instances, they're the complete opposite of green ops, because you're committing to a level of resource to be up for a number of years at a resource level, which is basically committing to a static level of carbon emissions as well. So there might just be a conversation to kind of cut a long story short, that at some point you might not want to make that cost reduction because of the impact it might have on your sustainability score. And there'll obviously be a threshold, and that'll be for senior management to do. At the moment, I guarantee that any cost saving will trump any sustainability saving. But it will just be very interesting at what point those scales tip to, actually, Chris, you're doing really great work on FinOps here, but can you liaise with the GreenOps guys? Because they've got their targets, and we're very new within NHS England, but we want to be on the front foot. I'll just keep this last bit short. That when you introduce FinOps, it's quite simple. Your metric is a pound, and everyone knows what a pound is. Everyone knows what £10,000 is. Everyone knows that £1 million is a lot of money. Metric tons of carbon is 1 million. Is saving 1 million brilliant, or is it the world's worst thing in the world? So, you're really going to have to educate people on this, and it's about the business. And what scopes are involved. Trusting the suppliers where your single point of truth is. Those ones might have scope 1 and 2. Those might want to have scope 1, 2, and 3. And it's going to be I don't know how. My key thing I'm putting out there to the organisation is that we've got to educate everyone before we even try to do green ops.
And have you got any other experiences on green ops?
Sorry.
No, I was just about to say I haven't. We've just put our foot in the water.
So one of the really gnarly bits of green ops right now, you've just mentioned like carbon CO2, tons of carbon CO2. One of the really things that bother me quite a lot about that right now is that we use one number globally for an estimation of CO2 carbon emissions, right? Which is crazy when you think about, like, for example, power generation in somewhere like Poland, which is almost exclusively coal-fired and gas-fired, versus power generation in northern Sweden, which is almost entirely non-emissions, right? And yet the world uses one single carbon figure to calculate emissions based upon things like power and other things. So we're not there yet in terms of our accuracy at all. And also, you touched on the fact that sometimes FinOps and GreenOps goals kind of conflict or don't work together. Yeah. Cheaper regions in cloud are usually more polluting. They're the higher emissions cloud. So we're going to come to a point eventually where the decision needs to be made. Do we do this for? It's not even speed, cost, and quality anymore. It's speed, cost, quality, and environmental impact. Right? We now have a square. So we now have to think about, well, okay, if we move this to this data center, this cloud location, it'll save us a lot of money, but actually our carbon emissions are going to go up by a factor of 300. Is that okay? Right. So there's some interesting problems there with the data that we're not there yet to solve. That's ongoing work.
Andrew, I'm going to come to you. What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be wrong of me to be on a podcast in 2024 and not bring up AI and sort of the automation side of things. I think it's something that has been around for well, I say it's been around forever. It's not. It's been around in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and suddenly we've kind of got into a situation where AI was an ideal. It was still a movie franchise, featuring a large Polish bodybuilder. I'm not sure if I can use names on these podcasts, but ultimately that's what it was, right? It was the Terminator, and we weren't really sure what was happening. And now suddenly we're in this position where AI is so important to the sort of the horizon, what the future of a lot of computing is. And we've recently obviously seen that Microsoft, say last week, had announced that the Copilot is now available in sort of different licensing packaging, and Bytes as sort of a Microsoft reseller and work with Microsoft. We're now seeing customers come to the forefront and say, right, we want to get on this bandwagon. We want to join, sort of sit here with AI. So, in terms of kind of, how we can see that potentially within sort of cloud management, could we potentially be looking at, we talk about bringing in, reserved instances and looking at kind of all reserved capacities and right sizing. Are we soon in a position where that's all going to be done for us? We're going to be kind of sitting there relying on technology that's going to be doing all that for us based on either parameters that we've set, or if it's, a truly functioning AI, it's doing it itself because it understands the
predictive analytics.
Exactly. And I think that's a huge thing that, I say, it probably doesn't seem that far off. I think, when we see how quickly things have grown. So, it's definitely on the table. And I think, as AI continues to develop, I think, when we've seen where it's come in the last year or so, in the next 12 months, I think if we re-recorded this podcast on the 26th of February next year, I think we'd really start to, we'd be having a completely different conversation about what's just happened. So, there's some really interesting stuff happening with it. I think, it's something, which is something worth keeping an eye on.
Okay. Doug, from your perspective, anything else that's not been mentioned there that we should be aware of, concerned of? What's on the horizon for cloud management?
I think all the comments that have been made are very fair. There's a tried and tested phrase within the NHS, which is all about prevention rather than cure, right? In terms of if you can prevent something happening, that's going to save you miles more money and before you actually feel the effect of something happening itself. Now, I'm a realist, and I think you've got to be careful about helping people understand. Chris talked about culture and education, so did Ben. I think that's a pivotal thing that people need to be able to do before you then get onto the more clever, intelligent, smart type stuff. But I think that's coming, as Andrew has said, very, very, very quickly. So I absolutely see that we should be starting to use experiences and technologies that allow us to understand the consequences of the resources that we're using, how we're using them, which ultimately, because of the patterns that we'll see from that, will give us a view of what the ultimate cost might be. So we should be able to interpret and anticipate what is happening there before the cost profile comes up. And if you come back to the notion of FinOps, and Ben's completely right, it's not just about cost, but guess what? People come in with that mindset here. Hang on a second, guys. If I think about the other things and understand what my environment is doing and what it might potentially do tomorrow and next month, the cost thing will come to you as opposed to worrying about the cost thing in the first place. I just stick that out there.
Feels such a shame. I think we're only just getting started and this discussion's really started to go, but that is pretty... you're going to start charging me for your time, I fear, so I am going to have to bring this sadly to a close. But Ben, Andrew, Doug, Chris, thank you very much for joining me. It's been really insightful, very fascinating to talk to you all, and I'm sure our listeners have found it really useful. So thank you very much for joining me today.
No, thanks everyone.
Cheers, Mike.
Really good.
Thanks.
So I'm Mark Blanchard. You've been listening to this podcast on maximising value from the cloud in the NHS. Goodbye for now.